I hope that was a sufficient warning for you. You just heard my bias alert. I want to be clear that no matter how fair-minded I want to be regarding this book, I can't be totally fair-minded. Why? I am one of the contributing authors. So I want you to read this book because, well, I wrote one of the chapters, and I wrote what I did because I want people to read it, and I believe it will be beneficial. So while I'll do my best to be fair for Grace and Truth Volume 2, I want to be clear that I contributed to this book. And although I should also say I have no financial stake in this book whatsoever, even if it sold millions of copies, I wouldn't receive any of the funds from it. So I will not financially benefit from this book. But that being said, Grace and Truth Volume 2 is a multi-author work produced by True Grace Books and edited by Brad Matston and Dane Rogers. This volume of Grace and Truth looks at the subject of biblical interpretation. By limiting themselves to a single subject, Grace and Truth Volume 2 is a major upgrade over Volume 1. The singular subject allowed the book to flow better and feel more like a singular whole. While this book still suffers from some of the difficulties that arise and are pretty impossible to escape when having a multi-author book, such as repetition that will inevitably arise even with the best of editors when you have multiple authors, and a shifting of quality from chapter to chapter. I did find this book, though, to be a step up in quality and a great addition to the subject of Bible interpretation, a book that presents both the theory behind quality interpretation and then provides several excellent examples on how to put these great interpretation skills into practice. If you have a few moments, let me tell you a little bit more about Grace and Truth, Volume 2 on Bible interpretation. Welcome to Rev Reads. If you want to discover more books that will help you grow in your skill of reading the Bible, please subscribe to the channel in order to stay up to date with my latest book reviews. Also, share this video with others. Your share is what let other people know about True Grace Books. And I want to say thank you to the Buy Me a Coffee members. Your support allows me to cover with all of the costs for keeping up with Rev Reads and allows me to produce these reviews and get them out to the world at large. And if you have benefited from Rev Reads, I would love for you to consider supporting the channel at a beginning membership price of only $3 a month. Grace and Truth Volume 2 can be divided into two sections. The first half of the book covers the nuts and bolts on how to best interpret the Bible, how we should view the Bible with the importance of inspiration, thanks to Daniel Gottfried, J.B. Hickson's quality work on all of the influences that come upon us that shape why we believe what we believe. And then the best chapter in the first half of the book was by Paul Miles and his work on meta-hermeneutics to dispensationalism. Meta-hermeneutics asks the most fundamental of questions regarding interpretation, such as, what's the source of language? And I gotta say, the entire chapter, it was all great. Honestly, when I saw the title of the chapter and then got started on it, I kind of sighed. I was like, oh, come on, Paul, meta-hermeneutics? But it was really good stuff. I think the biggest problem with the book occurred in the first half, and that is all of the concepts and guidelines and insights for good interpretation of the Bible all end up leading the student to the Word of God to the same place. And that is the importance of literal, grammatical, historical interpretation of all of the Bible. That's working to determine the author's meaning that he's giving to the original audience of the book. And since all the chapters really end up driving toward the same goal, there ends up being some repetition in the first half of the book. At times, I felt like I was reading the same basic truth, just in slightly different ways. And again, I think this is one of the inevitable drawbacks of a multi-author work on a single topic, and I would say that's the biggest negative in the book. But the second half of this book was wonderful. I devoured it. Brad and Dane gave me the favor of setting my chapter in the midst of those best chapters of the book, but starting with John Clark's chapter on guaranteed fruit bearing to Ben Coleman's work on John 6:24-71, all of those chapters were gold in my mind. Clark's work on how perseverance of the saints cannot be supported by a consistent literal interpretation was so good. I am always clamoring for more books by John Clark, and this chapter helps demonstrate why. And then Roger's chapter on interpreting the parables was the best chapter in the book, in my opinion. Parables can be difficult to interpret, and to add to the difficulty of it, we also have 2,000 years of different interpretations sitting upon our shoulders that sometimes take wildly different views of these parables that brings even more complexity to it. Well, Rogers helps to give you the tools that you need to safely and accurately navigate these stories. In the future, when I get stuck on how to understand a parable, I'm probably going to refer back to this chapter as a refresher on guidelines for interpreting the parables in the Bible. So everyone who is teaching and preaching through the Bible, you need to read Dane's work on the parables. Then it's followed by Maston's eye-opening work on ecclesia, or assembly, or the church, in Matthew 18. And oh boy, he presents a strong case that ecclesia in Matthew 18 cannot be referring to the church. It's a case that's pretty difficult to argue with, and honestly, something that I never really considered. So it's something that I'm going to be chewing on this for a while, Brad. It was really good stuff. Then you have Ben Coleman's work on John 6, which is a breath of fresh air in comparison to many of the other takes on that chapter in the church. Along with Bob Carey's work on how does God draw people to believe in Jesus, we now have two very well done treatments on this chapter. One in the form of an entire book and another in a much more condensed presentation, which you have here, to understand the very misunderstood verses on the Father drawing people to the Son. The next two chapters of the book were okay, not up to the level of the chapters that I just went through, but then the book ends with an exclamation point with the work of Tom Ekman. Now, I knew with this book ending with Ekman that it would be great, right up to his usual quality, and his work on Overcomer, yeah, just as good. I have zero complaints with his work in that chapter, and I loved it. One of the things I really enjoy about Grace and Truth Volume 2 is that with authors such as John Clark and Tom Ekman, I love those guys. And I don't think a lot of people in our Grace community are as familiar with their writings as I would like them to be. And I think that's a shame. And one thing I hope with a book like this is that you get people who are excited about regular names that they are familiar with, like J.B. Hickson, Bradley Mattson, Daniel Gepfrick, and then it will allow you to introduce you to others that you can learn from and get excited with as well. But I want to encourage you right now to grab your own copy of Grace and Truth Volume 2 on Bible interpretation today.